So, funnily enough, just realized this after I recorded the episode. This was going to be our 50th episode. Wow. Thank you so much for tuning in. Here's 50 more. Let's get into it. Most teams build up from the ground up or build over time. This one was started from nothing. From day one, FC Naples had to create an identity, build a roster, connect with the community, and do it all under the pressure of results. So what does that actually look like behind the scenes? Welcome to the PitchGrid, where football meets perspective. I'm your host, John McDaniel, and today I'm joined by the coach and sporting director of FC Naples, Matt Poland. We're talking about building a club from the ground up, player development, creating a culture, and why Naples might just be the perfect place for something special in American soccer. Matt, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's an honor to have you on the show, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it, man. What made you want to take on the project at FC Naples specifically?
Yeah. So the main focus of what drew me here was my family moved to a town 20 minutes south of Naples 15 years ago called Marco Island. And so during my off seasons while I was playing and coaching, I would spend a majority of the off season down here in Marco Island. So when I got injured and moved into coaching, I actually coached the local high school. I coached the boys team for 2 years and the girls team for a year during my off season break, because in Scandinavia, the off season's the winter. And in Florida, high school soccer, the season is winter. So it worked basically perfect in terms of that. And so I really got involved in the community, obviously in the soccer side of things, but just overall with the community. So going and coaching in a community you care about it's important to me. The making the soccer on the field mean an impact off the field. And then obviously personally to be able to coach and live 5 minutes from my parents is fantastic. It just, I lived in Europe for 6 years. So I didn't see my family almost at all. And so the opportunity to get to bring them along the crazy journey that professional coaching has been awesome. And, having them in the stands every game has just been fantastic.
That's really cool. I like that a lot. What was the big unknown going into this project?
Yeah, I mean, you name it, it's part of it. I think the first and foremost is, will this club last? Right? Unfortunately, in U.S. soccer, there's a lot of clubs that have started and a year, 2 years later, they fold. You don't know, it's a new market. You don't know how the community is going to react. It's new people getting involved in starting the club, right? Like, will all those things work together? And there's so many question marks before the first ball is kicked. There's so many things behind the scenes that you have to get right. Down to the local mayor or whoever, in our case, the commissioners, and getting them to approve certain things for us to use the county stadium and blah, blah, and the list goes on and on and on. And so I'd say there's so many things you have to get right. And if you get a few of those wrong, it's really hard to make it. And so you go in with just, 1,000 check marks you have to hit and no guarantee you're going to get there. And again, that's talking before we even talk about on the field actions.
Right. For sure. I can't imagine like the trepidation. Like I know like most people will probably know like how trepidatious it is to even be like in an English club and how quickly it can fold. We saw that with Sheffield Wednesday. So like I can't imagine just being building it from the ground up, how treacherous that can be. What did the owners say to you when you took the job, and how important is it having their support to fulfill your vision for the club?
Yeah, it was interesting. So they had a welcome party in January of 2024, and it was a welcome party to the community. They had just announced, hey, we're going to be a professional club. So I went to the welcome party and I literally walked up to the CEO of the club and I was like, hey, my name's Matt Poland. You guys need a coach. I'm a coach. I'm already living here. So let's figure it out. And so obviously they went through their own recruiting process of looking at different applications. Luckily, I was involved in, being interviewed. And over the next 3.5 months, I guess I kept passing to the next round of the candidates. And in May of 2024, they offered me the job. I think for them, they were probably where we connected the deepest was meaningful impact for the community. There's certain things you can control results wise, but you can't ultimately control winning and losing to every degree. But what's really, I think, important is regardless of if you're winning or not, are you making that meaningful impact to the people that are supporting it? Are we giving a crest and something that they can all rally behind? Are we impacting specifically? I think the biggest impact you have is with younger kids, right? Because to them, that interaction or touch point with a professional athlete can be life changing and so monumental. And so there's all those factors of community that we really connected with. And then I think also just obviously it helped being from this area, understanding what the community needed, right? We had rapidly grown since COVID when a lot of people from up north moved down to Florida, and the amount of youth in the last decade has grown significantly. So the city was at a point where the natural next thing, whether it was soccer or a different sport, is you need a professional sports team. You need that as something to do for the community, something to represent the community.
For sure. I mean, that's huge, especially like I love that vision, building around the community, making sure the community is heard and involved in this club, which is incredible. Why is Naples the right market for soccer?
Yeah, Naples is, again, as I said, a lot of youth moving here. And obviously soccer's very popular in a lot of the, younger athletes in today's world. It's definitely growing in popularity. Naples also has a high, Hispanic and South American, Latino group of people that are passionate, lifelong soccer fans. And then again, you get to a city size of Naples, and Naples was originally, maybe a more sleepy beach town that people came to for vacation. And as the year long, not just snowbirds, but people living here year long increased, well, you need to start adding more activities that people do, right? It used to be historically Naples was like, there's a strip of restaurants called Fifth Ave, and you would go to the beach all day. You'd go out to dinner at, 4:35 p.m. on this, and then you'd go to bed because there wasn't as much to do. And you see it with just the restaurants or even maybe some of the nightlife. All of those things are increasing as the community's getting younger and year long. And so I think, again, soccer made sense given the stadium that was already built and all of that. But I just think in general, you just needed a professional sports team to come in to be that next stage in the growth of the city as a whole.
That's fair. I love that. What would you say is the identity of Naples, and how are you as a club trying to reflect that identity?
Yeah, Naples is obviously well known across the country. I think it's obviously known for beautiful beaches and all that, but it's also known for being a very wealthy area. There's a lot of successful people in whatever area or business that they're in. That's just, something that Naples is quite known for. And so for me, one thing that was really important to me, to my players to understand is we might not win a game, might tactically get something wrong in a game, we might lose a game, whatever it is. The one thing that we have to always have when we go out onto the field is hard work and effort. Right? A lot of these people are very hard workers. And if we don't, we have a responsibility as a club to represent the community that we play for. In this community, that representation is that hard work and effort, right? Some of our fans are lifelong soccer or football fans and have known the game. Some of them were season ticket members that had never watched a professional soccer game before they signed up to be a season ticket member at FC Naples. So they might not know, some of them may not know exactly what formation we're playing or this tactic or that. Obviously, they're going to learn as they become longer fans. But from day one, they're going to be able to see, are the guys giving effort? Are we giving full commitment and effort? And I think, on a baseline, when people are spending their time, which nobody has enough of, and their hard-earned money to come and support us, like the bare minimum we can do, regardless of result, is, again, that 100% effort.
Wow, that's a great answer, and I feel like many people would relate to that in a lot of ways. Do you see Naples as a long-term soccer market, and why?
Yeah, I mean, it's been incredible. Again, you have these fans that came out day one or even before day one and supported us. And all of it was based upon a vision. And you saw these fans stick with us through the first year. And now they're coming back year two. And already the bond between the club and the community from year one to year two is even deeper. Right now, the first year it was a player they didn't know that's wearing number whatever, 12. Now that jersey number means something. Now that player that's returning means something to them, right? And there's this, we've gone through high highs, we've gone through heartbreak together as fans and as a club. And, you know, a perfect example was last week we played in the US Open Cup and we had the privilege of hosting an MLS side. And we had, I think, 4,700 people to support us. And the excitement and the buzz of the community for something like that. And they were, you know, I had people saying like, we're just so proud that as a city, like we got that. One thing that I got, early on, somebody said to me, and it was really profound and impactful. And to kind of go back to your question with it, of why I think sustainability is possible here is there was somebody that they said, I'm so excited we have a soccer team. And he goes, I don't know anything about soccer, but I finally have a coach. And he goes, you're not just the coach of the soccer team. You're the coach of this city now because you're the only pro sports team in town. And I was like, oh gosh, pressure's on, right?
Yeah.
But somebody that didn't know anything about soccer, didn't really care about soccer, was just happy to have that as part of their community because obviously sports plays a big identity in a city. And so I've just seen all these different interactions from people that are diehard fans to people that have never been to a soccer game before us to whatever, you know, young kids that are just learning about the sport, and the support we have has just been incredible. So I only think as the relationship between club and community continues to grow, it'll only get stronger.
Wow. That's incredible. I can't imagine the pressure, but also like you have to embrace that pressure at the same time, I'm sure, as a club and of being the city's representative. That's pretty cool. What does building a professional football club from the ground up actually look like from day to day?
Yeah, the first couple months are kind of crazy. It's like a blank canvas, and you're working in so many different lanes, right? I think everyone thinks of, for myself, right? I can't speak of other roles in the club, but for me as the head coach and sporting director, you know, you look at it, oh, head coach, what do you have to do? You have to, you know, find the players. And then as sporting director, you're talking to agents and you're doing that recruiting. And then it's like, well, wait a second. Yeah, you have to find 23 players. You also have to figure out the budget and how all of that manages together. But wait, the players aren't all from here. So then you need to play a role in, you know, going and finding apartments. And then, but the players need training gear and travel gear and suitcases and winter gear when we travel and this and that. So you're ordering all this gear for players. Okay, well, I also have a 7-person staff, so I need to go out and find those people and hire them and make sure they're the right fit. And it just goes on and on of like, you know, besides of, hey, we travel every other weekend. Okay, how does that travel look? What's the process in place for that? And so obviously it's not just me. I had, a lot of people doing a lot of work from the front office and everything. But, you know, your mind's in so many different places because there's so many different processes you have to create. Let alone, you know, we didn't have a single soccer ball or a soccer cone on the sporting side of things when I started. So it's everything, you know, usually if you come into a college or if you came into a new pro team, if I took over a new team next year or whatever, somebody took over a new team, you'd have 10 to 12 returning players and you'd have all the gear in place and maybe one or two of the staff members might be remaining. So you're building off of, let's say, at least at a minimum 43% of what needs to be completed, right? When you come in with a new club, it's 0% and you got to build it all the way up. And it's also, it's like, this is all hypothesis, right? You don't know when you bring in 23 players, how are they going to gel together? When you bring in, if you have 10 players and you're bringing in 12, you have a pretty good idea of how those 12 pieces are going to fit because you already know 10 of the pieces. When you know 0 and you have to make the first decision of what player to sign, and then it's like domino, 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 right? And when do you sign that player? And if you sign this player, then guess what? Maybe in 2 weeks, another player is suddenly a free agent that you didn't know about, but now you've spent that money. So what's the timing or the cadence of when you want to sign these players, right? All of it is absolutely wild to go through the first time.
Man, I can't imagine having to deal with all that. at the same time, deal with personal matters and business and all that. Man, what's something about all those dominoes that fans would never really think about?
Yeah, the one to me, is culture. Culture is maybe a buzzword. I think at its core, like culture is such an important part of, any community, but in this case in sports, like you're going to have good times. You're going to have bad times. You're going to have easy days. You're going to have hard days. And ultimately, like what your culture is going to either get you through those or it's not. And you're either going to get through it together because of your culture or it's going to be a terrible toxic environment. Problem is when you bring in, right, for my staff and my players, it's 30 of us.
Right.
So I bring in 29 people. I could ask them, write down on a piece of paper, what is your ideal culture? And they might all have the perfect answer, but it's going to be 29 different ones. And none of them are going to be exactly what, as a head coach and sporting director, my vision for this club is culture. So how do you get a bunch of 20-year-old men all to come into this environment, leave the, call it ego of where they've been before and what they've seen, right? Oh, well, I was here and this worked here. Okay, that's great, but we're not that and we're not there. And how do you get the trust of 29 people in a 7-week preseason to all buy into the same identity? And I think that's the hardest part of the whole process.
For sure. I mean, so Matt, what does culture mean to you as a sporting director and coach?
Yeah, I think culture is our true north, right? Like the sports world is crazy and I liken it to a ship rolling in the waves. And what is that thing that culture is our compass? Whatever way the winds are blowing that day, if the storms are broiling, if the ship is shaken, whatever this is our identity. This is who we are, no matter what's happening around us. This is the direction that we're headed. And to me, that's culture. And that the core of what culture is then answers every decision, every action, every way we communicate with each other, everything, how we deal with things. Culture gives us that guideline.
So describe what that culture that you want for the club is. What do you want the identity for people not from Naples to be? What do you want them to know FC Naples for as a culture and identity?
Again, hard work and effort are massively important to us. Respect is a big one. Respect for ourselves, the way we train, the way we play, respect for our opponents, respect for the fans, right? A big thing for me is, whatever happens in a game, like as a team, we make sure to go around and clap and cheer and thank every fan that came out to watch us. It's a commitment to being 1% better. It's a focus on controlling our controllables. And it is a relentless pursuit of excellence while embracing suffering.
That's interesting. I like that last statement. How are you able to get that across to the players? Like, how are you how do you make that come across and make them understand that those are the key pillars of the club?
You talk about it early in preseason. For me, I believe storytelling is one of the most important things. If I just go and talk about whatever, being a hero, let's just say, you might remember it a week from now, you might not. If I tie somehow that hero story into an actual story of somebody going through something and doing something courageous and whatever, you're probably going to remember that story a lot longer than me just talking. So storytelling drives home and keeps ideas in their brain longer. And then it's making sure that those pillars are seen every day. And it's in the way we train. It's the way we prepare for games. And then it's also constantly looking back, right? So if we have a training that isn't our best, it's reflecting immediately, hey, that is not to the standard. And it's continually like kind of tweaking things a little bit so that we all kind of have a feeling in our gut of when this is good culture or this isn't meeting it. And again, it's never 100%. It's never easy, but I think the more you are really intentional of saying like, this was good. How did that feel? How did that look? This was bad because like it forces that reflection so that as a group, we can continue to go there.
Right.
But then I think the other part is probably the most important part because it's like, I think it's easy as a coach to say things, Ultimately, you have to bring the right staff and the right players in.
Right.
If you don't bring the right people in and they have no interest in buying into it, it doesn't matter what I say. And so, I can say and do all the quote unquote right things. But ultimately, the culture we built is a reflection of the players and their willingness to be, the example of what we're trying to achieve here.
That's really insightful and makes me think about that kind of stuff. And I I love that insight into the inner workings of that. So, what was the moment that all felt like, "Dang, this is actually real. We're actually building a club. Actually, making. I'm playing Football Manager in real life."
Yeah. There's a few things. I think when you announce your first player on social media, because now you've gone public, that you actually have a professional player under contract. You have the moment of the first meeting in preseason, the first year, where we actually have a team here. We can actually compete. And then, the other moment is that first time the ball rolls after the whistle. You've now, the stands are full of fans, the jerseys designed, the players in market in Naples, and a ball is rolling and the tactics are out there. So, that kind of hits you of, oh wow, this is really happening.
Yeah, for sure. What was something that nearly went wrong early on in the building stages?
I don't think, to be honest, like from the time I took on, there was nothing that went wrong. I think it's just you have to go into it understanding that what you think is going to happen, you have to be very flexible to then what will happen.
Right.
And so that's why I don't know if anything went wrong. There was constant redirections and changes, but it didn't feel like it was going wrong. It was just, okay, that wasn't the way this process would go, and you're constantly that's part of coaching as a whole is adapting, right? You have your tactics and then you find out the other team decided to change their tactics. So everything you worked on for the week doesn't matter because it's not how the other team's playing suddenly or whatever. And so adaptability is the name of the game in professional sports. I think probably the biggest challenge that maybe we didn't fully realize how big of a challenge it would be is the travel for the guys. You're going smaller market to smaller market across the US and it's a nationwide league. We would go to California and Washington State and Idaho and Maine and Wisconsin. And so those are quite long distances from Naples, Florida.
Right.
And that's essentially, you look at it every other weekend, you're doing that and you're getting on a plane. And because it's smaller market to smaller market, there's usually a layover or a couple hour bus ride. You're doing that on a Friday. You play a game Saturday. Sunday's another all day travel day. They get Monday off and then you're back on Tuesday building for the next game and do that from, for us preseason started January 15th last year. Exit meetings were November 13th.
Wow.
So it's 10 months of just that on repeat. We played with preseason games last year. I think we played 40.
Goodness. That's an EFL championship season pretty much. Wow.
Yeah.
So you bring up the travel. That's interesting because I was talking to someone and they were like, well, Naples doesn't have like a huge airport. So what is travel like for y'all, considering y'all don't have like a major airport like right in Naples?
So luckily we have Fort Myers International Airport. And that's about 25, 30 minutes from our facility.
Okay.
So it's quite easy for us to travel in terms of that. And with how much travel happens to Fort Myers, Naples, the Gulf side of Florida, there's a lot of flight options for us, depending on where we're going. It's maybe to Atlanta and then it's, another connecting flight there. We have flights to Charlotte a lot. We have flights to Texas. Then from Texas, anywhere on the West Coast or maybe even Chicago if we're going Midwest. So in terms of that, we're lucky. There's other clubs that we play at where maybe it's a 2-hour bus ride from the closest airport to the city. And that obviously adds a lot of time, but luckily for our guys, it's a pretty easy initial to get to the airport. It's very easy from our facility.
Wow, that's crazy. Think about what are some things you have to avoid when you're building a club?
Yeah. Again, I think it's especially when you're building a new club, it's really important. I think getting the right people in. I think an established club, you can take a few more risks on a stronger personality And there's players that maybe have been there for 3 years. And, if you bring in a stronger personality, but again, you have 10 returning players, they're going to conform to what the culture of that organization is, right? I think in year one, you don't have that foundation. And so if you do bring in a stronger personality before there's a set core group of players already in place, they can quickly pull players to their side, and then that becomes the culture. And so I think it's really being intentional early on and I forget who wrote it in the book about, I think, business leadership, but it was like, get the right people on the bus and then figure out, what their role is. And obviously a little different with soccer because of the athletic part, but I do think there's a lot of truth to that, of making sure you get the right culture builders, and then from there you can start to expand in who you bring in.
I like that. What is something you've learned that will serve you not just in FC Naples, and hopefully you're there for a long time, but as as a sporting director in your coaching career as well?
I think the thing that continually is the most important thing is communication. I think communication with the group as a whole, setting clear standards, communicating when those standards aren't met, communicating with individual players, good and bad, being willing to have a hard conversation, being okay with a player being mad at you for a couple days, but telling them a hard truth, and not in a negative or derogatory way, but telling them, things they might not want to hear, but are said in a way that you're saying it because you care about them in their career and want them to succeed. I think it's easy when whatever, if a player's not playing, it's easy to just not have the conversation. Unfortunately, it doesn't give that player clarity. And what I've found with players more often than not, even if they disagree with what you're saying or why you're making a decision, they at least can work from an understanding of what you're seeing, and then they can adapt or train differently or whatever it is with the situation to try to improve it. Because if you leave a player to their own mind and you're not clear in your communication with them, they might go down a path that's completely not what you're thinking, but they are just going to think it because, again, you didn't communicate with them.
Right. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. So the word we've come up across a lot in this discussion is culture. So how are you building that culture, that connection with the Naples community, Matt?
Yeah, it's multitude of ways. Um, Obviously the biggest way is through our games, putting on a performance, doing it the right way at home in front of our home fans. I think, goes a long way in building those bonds of our identity. Again, the interaction with the fans after the game, I think, is important. I'm so proud of my guys, regardless of how the game goes, like they'll go and sign autographs and take pictures with kids for 35 minutes after the game. And they're very good at showing their appreciation for the fans. We do things with our season ticket members, and we do events with them where the season ticket members get to interact with the players outside of the soccer field. And I think that's important because sometimes it's easy to forget that these aren't just jerseys on nameless faces, but that these are human beings that are, 18 to 30 years old, going through their own life situations. And it doesn't mean they're not held to a high standard when the game comes, but it's okay to remember they're also a human being and have ups and downs outside of soccer that they're dealing with. Another thing is, our appearances of going into the schools, going to the hospital, and those interactions with different people from the community. Just today, the front office was out with another organization picking up trash on one of the beaches. There's so many different ways, but I think maybe the overarching thing is being out in the community. Not just expecting the community to come to us in our stadium, but making sure that we're actively putting ourselves out there in the community that we represent.
That's awesome. I love that so much. What was the hardest part of getting the community on board with supporting the club?
Yeah, with sports, sports are a deep emotional relationship. You look at whatever, it's like I remember when the Cubs won the World Series.
Right.
And I had friends that were posting that my grandfather was a Cubs fan his whole life, and he never got to see them win this game. And winning the World Series is so big to my family. And it's because there's a rich history of good or bad moments in between the club and the community. Winning highs, of winning a playoff game, the lows of losing a playoff game, whatever it is. When you're a new club, you're coming into this town, and I think for the community, you have to earn their trust because you're asking them, hey, one, monetarily support us by being a season ticket member, purchasing our jersey, whatever. And two, emotionally invest your time, right? We have 20 home games a year. So 20 or, 17 of your Saturdays and a couple of your Wednesdays and Sundays, we're asking you to come out and spend, let's say you get there an hour before the game's with halftime, hour 45, and then getting out of the parking lot after the game, call it 4 something hours, 20 times a year to give to us. And so you're asking a lot from your community, right? Support from fans and all is massive. The ask from a club. And so I think what's hard is how do you build the trust that you're doing it for the right reasons? Because it's really easy to say, hey, we care about community, we care about this, but are your actions in alignment with what you're saying? And I think building that trust that you're creating a professional team in this community for the right reasons is the most important, but also the most challenging thing to prove to the community.
For sure. What was the easiest, conversely?
Easiest? I think the part that it's professional sports, that part, it's like, again, what's something that every city needs is professional sports. So to the local person, the idea of a pro sports team coming to town, whether or not some of them might not even come to our games, but I guarantee that they feel like the city as a whole is headed in the right direction when they're adding professional sports to it. Because again, that shows the city size is at a certain, it means there's a certain amount of economic growth. It means that the community is interested in this type of activity and so on and so forth. So I think that part is probably the easiest sell. Because who doesn't want pro sports in their town?
Absolutely. I mean, here in the U.S., soccer isn't as prominent, but still that would definitely be a draw for sure. Has there been a moment where you saw the light bulb click on with people in the community that this was worth them supporting, or has it just been a gradual build and just more and more people are getting more and more excited?
Yeah, there were 2 moments to me last year that were massively impactful for 2 different reasons. We were in the Open Cup last year and we were playing against a higher level team, and we went to penalty kicks and we lost in penalty kicks, and it was heartbreaking. And you saw for the first time, like, the fans were upset, not angry. They were just, sad, heartbroken. And you could see they felt a very real emotion to what we were doing on the field. And then fast forward to October of last year, we were in the playoffs and we went into overtime. We went to PKs and we won the PK shootout to advance to the next round in the playoffs. And it was different emotions, but still that same deep emotion of, because they had now as a club and as a fan base, they had felt the other side of the low of losing a PK shootout. And now they felt the high emotional joy of winning it. And you need both in sports to really build that deep, rich connection with fans.
Yeah, man, penalties are just such a lottery. And I can't imagine the highest of highs and lowest of lows when you win or lose either.
It is the craziest emotional roller coaster, and every penalty kick that goes in, it feels like you're on cloud 9, and every one that's missed or a goalie saves it, it feels like the end of the world. It's such an emotional thing.
Absolutely. How do you, or are you, turning the casual fan into a loyal diehard?
Yeah, I hopefully in the way that we play, and also I think it's in the community that comes out, right? If you're sitting next to people, and I'll give an example of these 2 season ticket members. They didn't know each other before they bought their season tickets. Every game now, they see each other at the games. After the first couple games, right? They're talking before the game a little, they're whatever. And by the end of the year, these 2 guys are like best friends. And they're so excited to see each other at the game. Yeah, they're excited for the game, but like they're excited. Oh, I haven't, they said the first game of the season. They're like, oh man, I haven't seen you in 2 months since the last game. Like, I'm so excited to have you back. And they're just, and I think that's cool too when the team obviously builds its own, but when the game or the club itself is now building is just giving a space for relationships to occur. Cause now you have deeper connections than just the sports, right? Now you have friends that come to the game, and you have your soccer friends, and you only knew them because of the sport. But now you have a bond with those people that are different than the bond with the team on the field. And that's how you really build that deepness.
Wow. I think that's a very underrated aspect. I don't think many people talk about when we're talking about that. What makes a match day at FC Naples unique?
Well, first and foremost, I think, one of the things that I most enjoy is, our games are at night. The lights are all lit up around the stadium, and overlooking a stadium and having palm trees surrounding it. You can't ask for a better view than that. I think it's a moment I always try to be grateful for, because who doesn't want to live in a beautiful place and get the privilege of coaching here? But for us, the engagement of our fans, like they're so supportive during games, the way they cheer the guys on, the way they, if they disagree with the call from a ref, the way that they support the guys through it and all, it's incredible. And so you get all different people from all different walks of life all coming together under one common goal. And I think what makes pro sports unique is it doesn't matter if you're from, we have a lot of transplants, very few people that grew up here. So you might be a Chicago Bears fan, or you might be a New York Giants fan, or whatever, but you can all rally behind supporting this as your club for your city. And so it gives, the game day experience is like, this is the first time we as Naples have that crest that represents us all. Right. And in other cities, you see that in our league. And there's some cities though where they have other sports teams. And so maybe it's not as impactful because they've already had that bonding experience. But I think for us in our community, like, this was the first team that we all can support. And regardless of where we're from, we're all 100% committed to FC Naples for 90 minutes.
Yeah. How important is building that youth engagement with the club, and what are you doing to build that generation of fans that'll be the future fan base?
Yeah, the youth are massive. Again, I think those interactions and touch points with youth as a whole, they're every day or every game, they're, hey, will you sign my croc? Will you sign my shirt? Will you sign my arm? And you're like, you should probably ask your mom to make sure before I sign your face. But these are moments that, when I reflect back to when I was a kid, like I was big into athletics, and there were older athletes that, like, they interacted with me and I thought they were the coolest person, and I wanted to emulate their hairstyle, how they acted, all of these things. And so, one, that's the responsibility of the players and all to be good role models for them. But I think the amount of impact you can have on somebody at that age is so cool. We go to their schools, and some of the, they're pointing at the player. I went to his game last week or whatever. And they're so excited for that. We also do a lot of camps. And so you have these kids come and they get to be coached by one of these players at the week of camps. And then at the end of the week, they come to the game, and now they're with their friend and they're pointing, see that guy out on the field? He was my coach this week. And, the player comes over and high fives him after the game. And, the kid feels like he's the coolest kid in town, that this pro player recognized him and high fived him.
Yeah.
And, again, obviously there's impact outside of you and all, but I truly think that, it can't be understated the importance of the impact of what players can have and what the club can have on the community of youth.
I can't imagine. Like, I know, like, when a short aside here, we had Bengals players go to our church when I was living in Cincinnati, and because the pastor ran some Bible studies with the Bengals, and the players signed some gloves for me, and boy, dude, I still have those gloves. That's like one of my most incredible, like, possessions. Like, I have a glove from, like, actual players. So, like, man, I can't imagine what it's like for those kids, and that's awesome. I love that y'all really emphasize that. So take us behind the curtain, right? Let's go on the pitch for a bit. On the pitch, y'all had a great success in your inaugural season, but you fell short of an ultimate glory. What were some lessons you learned from that inaugural season?
Yeah, a lot. I think probably the biggest takeaway is, it's crazy over 30 games how tight the teams can be at the end of it, right? So in soccer, it's 3 points for a win and 1 point for a draw. And for us, it came down to the final game of the season of us getting a result to earn top 4 to get a home playoff game. And so it's just crazy that over 8 months of playing, traveling every other weekend, that the margins are so thin after that many minutes of soccer. So you have to, you don't know how a result in March can impact the playoffs in October. And making sure as a club, you're never taking any game for granted. And then the other part is, again, like when you have in our league, there's not as much depth. There's not as many, the roster size is smaller. And so, really being intentional with the training, with their load management, with making sure they're prehabbing correctly, making sure they're rehabbing correctly, making sure they're getting the rest, all while playing as much as they are. We're training, in the summer in Florida is no joke. And even every training day of how much they're sweating and how much of a toll that is on their bodies. And then again, every other weekend you're on flights across the US. And so really just the intentionality as a staff and athletic trainers and all of that of keeping the guys healthy is a lot of work.
I bet. I can't imagine, especially with the congested schedule, for sure. What's one mistake that you made last season that you feel you've corrected?
It's interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't say maybe a mistake. I think just being clear with everybody on certain things. I think it's easy to, as I was saying, like it's easy maybe to not have a hard conversation in a moment. And I think as a head coach, you have a responsibility to, be willing to put yourself in uncomfortable situations or whatever and give clarity of what an expectation is, and then making sure that you're making the right decisions in correcting things if they need to be. And I think that's something you're always evaluating as a coach.
Right.
It's hard because you don't have a magic 8 ball, and every situation's a little bit different and this and that. And, it's hard with that. So I think that's something as a coach, you're just always reflecting of, the decisions you make, whether that's in a game tactically, whether that's, sub or who to start or what standard to draw a line in the sand about or not. You're always reflecting and hopefully improving upon that. Because ultimately, as a head coach, I think the only way you can have success is by leading yourself correctly. And if you're not leading yourself correctly, you can't expect to lead and manage the people under you correctly.
Fair enough. What are some improvements? Because y'all are right now like at the top of the league. What are some improvements that you've made over this offseason that you're most proud of? And what did you change coming into the season that made you all flying high right now?
Yeah, for us, again, I kind of call it lessons learned in certain areas of things we could do better or, make things easier. I think the biggest difference between year 1 and year 2 is we had 9-10 returning players this year. And so with that, it gave us clarity of what we needed to go out and recruit to add to what we had. What did we lose that gave us success that we needed to refill? And then what areas of what we thought we needed of maybe a specific type of player that turns out based on our style, based on the league, it wasn't actually the right fit for us. And so, obviously going through 40 games last year gave us a much better understanding as a staff of what kind of profiles we were going to go out and recruit. And so I think for us, like our recruitment this year, quite pleased with, because I think we had specific targets in mind that, based on their profiles, we knew would help in our overall success.
So how do you balance results versus development?
Yeah, it's hard, right? Because ultimately in pro sports, it's only about winning, right? Like at the end of the day, that's the only thing that people speak about. If you develop well and lose, you're going to be out of a job. If you don't develop and win, you're still winning. So what can people say, right? But I think for us philosophically as a club, development's a massive important piece. We don't want to be a end of the career, end of the road for guys. We want to be known as a club that's a stepping stone. Hey, come to us, whether that's a year, 2 years, whatever it is, improve, give you a space to showcase your abilities, and then hopefully a bigger club comes calling for you. And so for us, we're intentional about the players that we sign, right? You can't go all young players because you need veterans to lead the group and be good role models. And you need a group of guys that are in their prime to get results on the weekend. But we also were very intentional with going after younger profiles that have maybe more development work to be had, but have much higher ceilings. Now that takes more work. It takes, for my assistant coaches, it puts a lot more responsibility on them because they're having to spend much more individual time with these players to work on their areas of growth than if they were a 5-year pro that, were much farther along in their development. And it's more about maintaining a player, right? Where you have a lot more players that are maybe ability to still grow than just maintain, which is exciting, but it's more work. And how do you balance it? Ultimately you have to find ways while they're still developing to get results. And so, for players, it's about figuring out how to put them in positions they can be successful at, hide or mitigate the areas of weaknesses in their game on game day. And then during the week, really work on those areas so that they can continue to improve.
That's interesting. So you mentioned recruitment, and how do you approach foreign recruitment? I know that's a little harder in USL League One, but like, how do you approach it, and where do you go to like even begin that process, especially in a lower league like USL?
Yeah, recruiting is all over the place. There's no two players ended up here the same way,
Right.
really. We have some players that I've worked with in the past that I brought with me, other players that have given me a headache playing against them that we've brought in. There's some obviously from the league that we've coached against. And then it's, a massive network of other coaches that, college coaches that have seniors graduating that recommend certain players to you. You have different agents that you've built relationships with and they know the profiles that you're trying to sign and they can help in sending specific profiles that are probably more in alignment with the type that you're looking at. And yeah, it's crazy, absolutely crazy. Because if you look at it, over the last 2 years, let's see, we've had players from Croatia, England, Scotland, Ireland, Spain, Germany, Timor, Australia, Argentina, Mexico,
Wow.
Colombia. I'm probably forgetting somebody in there. Haiti. So it's probably 17 different countries we've had players come from. And so it's crazy, how each story of how they ended up here. But that's the exciting thing with soccer is because it's the world's game. Like there's players everywhere to go and
Absolutely.
find. And it's, you have to be intentional with building a good reputation with agents and all so that they want to send, especially again for us, we want to be a development club. So we have to show that we take care of younger players and help them improve so that an agent that has a high prospect younger player is calling us wanting to send him to us, because he knows we'll treat them right and help them in their path.
Wow, that's fascinating to think about. Is how would you describe FC Naples' tactical identity?
We're going to defend as a group. We're going to be very disciplined and detailed in our defending. And, I think this year in our 10 games play, I want to say we have 6 shutouts. So clearly we prioritize the defensive side, and that's every player on the field has a responsibility in that. Offensively, we want to play on the front foot. We want to be lethal in transition counterattack moments, and we want to, while a team is still disorganized after winning the ball, we want to be able to get up the field and score goals. Obviously, inside of that, you're always trying to layer the next piece of information, the next ability. And this year, for example, we've had to adapt. We were, I forget exactly the number, but the majority of our goals that we scored last year were scored within 8 seconds of gaining possession of the ball. So this year, teams have started to adapt to us and they've sat back. And so this year, I think we're at 19% more possession per game in the
Wow.
first 10 games than we were last year. So as a group, it's a fun challenge, but now it's okay. How do we work if teams are going to sit back off us a little more and not give us as many transitional moments? Now we need to get better in possession and breaking a team down when they're organized in their blocks. And so that's the I think that's the fun thing of sports is,
Hmm.
you have your identity or your calling card, but you're constantly adapting it to, because, the opponent is, if you're good at something, the opponent's going to take that away. And so then you need to work on plan B. And once plan B becomes good and they start trying to take that away, then you have to be able to switch to plan C.
Hmm.
And so I think that's the really fun part about sports is every week you're trying to add and layer information so that you can continue to be more dynamic.
Right. Yeah, for sure. How much do you adapt? You talked about adapting. How much do you adapt your system in a match, and what are things that you look for early to adapt in a match?
Yeah, there's core principles that we're never gonna move from. They're
Hmm.
always gonna be in any game plan that we have. And it's more of, making adjustments to best fit the opponent for that game. It's kind of like, we say it's like mid-block defending. We have our base formation we're going to defend in. Well, if the opponent's in a 3-back versus a 4-back, we're going to have to change what that looks like. The core principles are all going to maintain the same, but the formational setup is going to be different because there's different areas they could exploit based on their formation or whatever. So we try, what would I put at? Probably 80% we're staying the same. And then there's 20% is based on the opponent every game.
Hmm.
Maybe that would be a fair breakdown.
Fair. I totally get that. I mean, it's always based on no one team plays the same all the time. So yeah, that makes sense. What does a perfect performance look like to you?
Yeah, I don't think you can have one.
Fair enough.
I think if you hit a perfect performance, it's like why I keep playing, right? The goal of sports or athletes is always to be better. And so you always want to think there's always the next challenge or the next bit of information. But I mean, obviously I think for me, a great game is one that, you don't get scored on and you put 2 goals in. A 2-0 win, I think is absolutely great.
Mhm.
Because you haven't defensively, you haven't done anything wrong and you've scored multiple goals. So what more can you ask for in a game?
Fair enough. Yeah, I honestly can't complain. When I went 2-0 in Football Manager, I'm pretty pleased. So I get it. What do you look for when you look at film with the team after a match?
Yeah, it's a balance. And it depends on, I think, where the team's at and what the team needs in that moment. Sometimes a match feels worse. And when you watch it back on film, there's actually a lot of positive things. It was just the final action wasn't sharp.
Right?
Um, And I think the danger is, right, as not the danger, but the reality is a fan, you take the score line and that kind of becomes the whole meaning. Like you won 1-0, so the game was good. You lose 1-0 and the game was bad. And sometimes you lose 1-0 and you actually played a really good game. And
Right.
sometimes you win 1-0 and you played a bad game. And
Mm.
so it's really being intentional. What does the team need to see? Do they need to see the good moments because they don't realize how good they played? The result just didn't show it. Or do they need to see more corrective? I'd say we try to do a balance between it. So, it's some actions that were really good that we were working on that we want to continue to highlight the execution of. And then there's, hey, these are fixes that are controllable that if we get this right, this and this problem never happen in a game, and do it in a way that's not negative, but
Mhm.
more of, I think, an encouragement of if you believe you're close to a change, it's easy to put the work in because you feel like you're almost there.
Mhm.
When the task feels like a mountain to climb, it's going to
Right.
really be hard to get people to want to buy into climbing that mountain.
Mhm.
And so it's really about presenting in ways that make the players want to buy into continuing to be better.
Fair enough. What about when you're analyzing your opponents? What do you look for when you watch film or study them?
Yeah, you look for traits. So you look at, maybe their last 3 games and what are team traits that you're starting to see, whether, areas that they're really dangerous in or areas you think you can exploit, and then trying to see our formation and our style against it, right? Because sometimes there's maybe a weakness in a game, but that weakness doesn't fit our style. And so that weakness might not present itself in a game. And so you're trying to kind of envision your team against them. And sometimes the opponent that you're watching playing them is comparable to yours. And sometimes that team is very different stylistically. And
Mhm.
so it's not as like for like in what you're watching. But I'd say trends overall, right? It's not even okay, maybe sure, how was that goal scored, but how did they enter the final third? What was
Right.
the way in which they built that pulled the defense apart. All of those type of things will give a clear picture, because I don't think, you can never draw up perfectly. It's not American football where you can draw up this perfect play that's going to work,
Right.
because every single action of soccer, the opponent's going to be in a little different position. You're going to be in a little different position. And so it's more of overarching trends that our players then see the picture, so that regardless of what's happened in the game, they understand the idea behind what they're trying to achieve.
Fair enough. What's one tactical detail many fans overlook or misunderstand?
I think the one that's spoken about the most that's probably is formation. I always say you see a team's formation, quote unquote, at kickoff at the first half and the second half. And then after that, it's soccer. We have people ask me, what formation do you play? And it's like, well, if we're with the ball in our final third, it's going to be a different formation than if we're in possession of the ball in our defensive half.
Right.
And if we're pressing in the final third, we're going to be in a different formation than in a mid block. And if the opponent's in this formation, we're going to be in this formation. So that's an ever changing thing. And I think, a lot of people are like, oh, this coach plays this, a 3-5-2 or 4-3-3. And it's like, yeah, that might be the base structure, but inside of 5 different places on the field, that formation is going to be different. So I think that's something that a lot of fans, maybe unless you watch a lot of soccer, you might not recognize what those formations are and how they're changing constantly.
Yeah. How does that work? Like, how do you make sure that you blend and make sure like the opposition like doesn't totally get what you're morphing into constantly? That's the only thing I've always wondered about.
Yeah, I think to some degree they're gonna know. We have live cameras during the game. As much as it's beneficial to us, the other coach is watching on an iPad as well to see the formations. And so it's having clear understanding with the players of, this is when this breaks because of this formation. This is our solve or our fix to it. And as soon as you have guys that do that and get to the next spot to solve the problem, that's when you become very hard to be beaten.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's something I've always wondered about because I love thinking about tactics, but formation is something I never thought would be kind of misunderstood. What's one piece of advice you would give to anyone going into coaching, setting up tactics?
For the tactical side?
Yeah.
I think you have to coach to the players you have, not to the players you want. I've been at a lot of different coaching courses, and I remember I was at a course where there's coaches coaching 8-year-olds, and they're talking about, what style of soccer does your 8-year-olds play? And one of them saying, yeah, I try to be like Barcelona when Pep was there with the tiki taka, and you're sitting there, and obviously it's great to want to teach players to play, and I'm not knocking that, but
right.
You have to be honest of who you are as a coach and who your players are, right? Like Pep has to buy the best players in their position to play the style he wants. And that's not a knock to the U8 player, but he's not $100 million player and he doesn't have that abilities. And so I think as a coach, sometimes we get so wrapped up in what do I want versus what does the team need. And if you're making decisions based on what the team needs, you usually make better decisions than if it's just what do I want.
Fair enough. So speaking of coaching to your players, what does player development look like from day to day at FC Naples?
Yeah, for us, it's, can you look back and every week, are you getting 1% better being in our environment? And that can change every week. That could be, mental. It could be physical. It could be your sleep, your nutrition. It could be in the gym. It could be in how you take care of your body prehab. It could be a tactical understanding. It could be a technical ability, whatever it is. We want to constantly be creating an environment where players want to always be looking at little areas that they can improve upon so that over a 10-month season, they're a completely different player than when they started.
Wow. Yeah. How do you identify players that fit that specific type of system?
Yeah, you do your research, you talk to their former coaches, you watch their games. I have a multi-phone call interview process with the players. My owner also has a conversation with the players when we're getting close to recruitment. There's no magic 8-ball. You're not going to get every signing 100% right. And you hope you can, as you get to know the players, start to understand what genuinely they believe, not just what they're saying to try to get a contract. And you're not going to get every piece isn't going to be perfect. That's just the reality of sports. There's no perfect recruitment checklist. But I think when you're clear on what you want from a player, that player will instinctively want to be in that environment or not. And if that player is excited with what you've said and what your non-negotiables are, and they are excited for that, and you believe they fit that profile that you need, it becomes a much easier pathway in recruitment.
So what separates players that succeed versus players that don't?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you need a certain amount of, genetic gift. You need a certain amount of athleticism. You need a certain amount of technical abilities just to get to this level. And then really, I think when you get to this level, what separates it is the lack of complacency. The guys that are hungry to always get better, to improve, to do the little bit extra, to kind of be, obsessed with everything, not just the training, but obsessed with eating right, sleeping right, doing the things mentally to be sharp, all of that. Those guys, you just see them continue to excel to higher levels because they're living and breathing it. And it's a lifestyle, not just a job.
Right. And so it's obvious you value coachability a lot. Can you give an example of the type of coachability that you like to see?
Yeah, I always tell players before they come to me, I go, hey, I'm sure you've had amazing coaches. I'm not trying to, you know, tell you I know everything because I don't. I just say, come open that maybe even 1 to 5% I can teach you that you didn't know, or this environment can teach you. Maybe it's usually probably not even me. It's probably the environment as a whole. And if you just come in open to hearing a different perspective, whether or not you like it, agree with it, whatever, at a minimum, you'll have to think deeper about why you do an action and it will strengthen your reasoning. And so for me, it's like, just come open. If you come open, you're willing to hear information, like we can have a discussion. I think just across the world now, that's kind of a lost art. Everyone comes into discussions to prove why they're right instead of actually listening to what the other side is trying to say.
Fair enough. How has your evaluation process evolved?
Yeah, I think, again, I use that word clarity. The more clear I can be of expectations and what I'm looking for out of a player, of what I need out of a player, of what my profile looks like, I think helps, make a clear understanding of if this player will fit or not with what we're trying to achieve.
How do you build chemistry in the squad, especially since it's so young in the club history and you're still, fluxing in and out of that?
Yeah, obviously you can do certain things as a team. You can, do things off the field to get to know guys or have them know each other. You can play some, games and warm-ups to build some good bonds and memories. And I think it's on the team as a whole of being intentional, of hanging out with each other and caring about each other and getting to know each other. Because every team I've been a part of, if I like the guy next to me, I'm going to work a lot harder to make him look good than if I don't like that guy.
Fair enough. And so speaking of, chemistry and players, and how has coaching and playing not only in Europe but also in the US shaped you personally?
Yeah, you learn something different from every culture. And that's why I love that football is so worldwide, because we get players from all these different experiences that all have something to share to our environment of what they've experienced. And so, from being in Finland, I learned certain things. From being in Sweden, I learned certain things. From coaching in Chicago, I learned other things. And some of it's tactical, some of it's just interaction, sometimes it's management. You learn different things from each person. And again, it comes back to that openness to always wanting to be learning and growing. And even as a coach, like, the more you learn, the more it benefits the guys below you. So, why not be open to it?
Right, for sure. What did playing and coaching in Europe specifically teach you?
Yeah, I think maybe the sport there is farther along in terms of the impact it makes in the community. And so, you had fans that if you lost games were coming up to you in the supermarket and giving their opinion on things. And maybe it brought, I'd come from college where outside of your team and your coach, like no one really cared if you won or lost necessarily. And so it brought just another level of understanding the responsibility you have when you're in this environment that you're playing or coaching for more than just yourself.
Fair enough. What experiences about stand out for you as crucial moments in your personal development as a coach?
Yeah, there's quite a few. I think probably the biggest one is my first year over in Europe. I decided to, bench a player that had been with the club for a long time and kind of use him more as a sub than as a starter. And I kind of made the decision, like, I'm the head coach. It's my choice. And I didn't have as much conversation with him about it. And ultimately, yes, I am the head coach and it is my choice, but ultimately he's one of my players. And that was a big lesson for me in communication and, being okay having a difficult conversation, even if the player's mad at me. But again, at least I'm giving them the respect they deserve to hear why I'm making that decision.
Fair enough. I mean, man, I can't imagine like having to juggle all that. It has to be a lot just to think about even. What's different about the challenges of coaching in the US versus Europe, and what continues to challenge you?
Yeah, every environment's different. There's different pros and cons. There's different challenges of, travel or budget or whatever it is, or how many forward players you can have or this, that, and the third. So I think every environment you go to is going to have a different set of challenges. It's more of, when you go into a job, are these challenges ones you believe you can deal with and not go crazy, because you're never going to find a job with no challenges. And so it's really just, recognizing these are the challenges and am I okay with that or not?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I like that. So now that you have dipped your toes into USL and are experienced now in the league somewhat, in your opinion, can USL eventually compare to MLS?
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be MLS. I think it can continue to grow its version of soccer. I think with promotion relegation, that's going to be a massive thing for USL when that comes out, because now you're bringing kind of the more standardized version of soccer across the world into the US households, and the, again, high highs and low lows of promotion relegation really bring a deeper connection to the fan bases.
Do you think that could actually, like, it can outgrow MLS actually realistically?
I think it depends on what that means by outgrow. Obviously,
Hmm.
USL right now is in more smaller markets, so you don't have the same amount of population or stadium sizes. That obviously, in terms of market size, there's always going to be that dynamic. Again, I just think the promotion relegation, when that comes, will build a deeper bond of soccer in those communities.
Yeah, fair enough. I love that it's gone to promotion relegation. That was one of the more exciting developments for USL for me. What needs to happen for USL to keep growing?
Yeah, I think it's these bringing these teams, that are doing it the right way and are really integrating with their community. And you look at a new team like this year, like AC Boise, and they had over 7,000 at their first two home games.
Wow.
And, the way they've integrated themselves into that community and given that community something to back and cheer is incredible. And so the more clubs like that are coming into cities that don't have professional soccer and are making an instant impact will only continue to grow this game.
And where do you think that U.S. soccer is headed in the next 6 to 10 years? Is it stagnating? And if so, can it change and grow?
I think it's growing. I think it takes time to grow a sport. And again, we compare ourselves to these countries that have been hundreds of years of soccer at high levels, and they've been their main sport as well, right? We're such a diverse country of athletics. So it's not every good best athlete goes soccer, right? There's other sports to compete with, which in other countries, soccer is really the only main big sport. But in terms of growth, I mean, you see it. You see the number of kids out at soccer fields on a school night, kicking a soccer ball around, 10, 15 years ago. How many of them are throwing a football around? You see youth clubs continuing to grow. You see, again, all these pro teams that are starting, and you add, again, promotion relegation, another division of USL, and that will only continue to drive more interest and more fans to it.
Do you think that youth development is becoming more of a thing?
No, I think it's growing. I mean, look at some of the transfers of younger players over the last 5, 6 years, right? You have Sullivan out of Philly signing with Man City. You have Gaga from Chicago Fire signing with Chelsea. That was unheard of 20 years ago. And so more of those type of profiles that are being developed in the US and those clubs are being rewarded financially for that development and selling to Europe will hopefully continue to want clubs to put more resources into development because ultimately sports are a business. And if you can make money off it, all the better.
Fair enough. I would love to see that develop, especially with the World Cup coming. Do you think the World Cup could actually like bring more of an attention to the sport into like clubs like FC Naples?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you look at the impact when the women won the World Cup and the amount of fans that came after the World Cup to the NWSL games. It
Mm.
was a massive increase. And so I think, you know, when kids are seeing it on TV with their families and seeing the passion of some of these nations and hopefully seeing the US do really well, I think it's natural to, oh, let's check out the team in our backyard. You know, I think we'll get a lot of new people coming out to games across the US that hadn't ever been to one before.
That's what I would love to see. So if you could look into the future, where do you see FC Naples in 3 to 5 years potentially? Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully, you know, just deeper roots in this community. Again, something I'm really hope to see is some of these young players that are fans of the club now, eventually developing into academy and signing first team contracts with the team. That would be incredible to see, you know, people sign for their hometown club that they grew up supporting and they have photos of them with the players of when they were 10 years old and now they're one of the players. That would be incredible to see that happen with the club.
Absolutely. That would be fantastic. What would you like for your legacy to be at the club?
That's a great one. Legacy. I feel too young to say that. No, I think for me, again, I look at myself as a steward of the club. And I try to make the decisions that best benefit the club for its long-term success. I want the club to be around a lot longer than I am. And so hopefully I played a small role in building a great foundation of a club that, you know, hopefully has a lot of success on the field, but also positively impacts the community for generations to come.
So here's the big question. When people think about FC Naples in the future, what do you want them to say about this team and this club?
Yeah, that we fought every minute of every game to be successful, that the guys gave everything they could to help the club. And hopefully there's stories of people, and what we did and how we did it that were meaningful in their lives and impacted them in a positive way.
Honestly, that's the most wholesome way to end this episode. Matt, really appreciate your time today. This was an awesome conversation, and I know people are going to get a lot out of it. Before we wrap up, I want to give you the floor. Where can people follow you, FC Naples, to stay up to date with everything going on in the club if they want to be more involved with it?
Yeah, obviously, FC Naples, if you search that on any social media platform, you can see everything going on with us. You know, I'm on social myself if you search my name and TikTok and all of TikTok and Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube and all that. So we have social media is the world we live in now, but I think that's what's cool about it is you can live in a different city and still be able to keep track of another club. So hopefully people, you know, turn a game on ESPN Plus and check us out and get to see our, the tenets I spoke about in action.
Absolutely. I mean, so what's the next game for y'all coming up?
Next Wednesday against Miami FC in the USL Cups.
Nice.
Get a little bit of a break until the next one, but coming up soon.
Yeah, week break is always good in soccer for sure. So big thanks once again to you, Matt, for coming on the show, giving us a real inside look at what's going on to build a club from the ground up. And if you've enjoyed this episode and want more conversations like this, whether it's the NFL, EFL Championship, Premier League, or the growth of soccer in the U.S., make sure you're subscribed to the PitchGrid. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, a rating or review just goes a long way and tells people you enjoy the show. Drop a like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and let me know if you had to build a club from scratch, what's the first move you're making. But until next time, y'all, stay sharp.